What's going on, everybody? Today we're turning that lined tubing in the background into this Wigwag pendant. This is a hollow Wigwag pendant done with Wavy Gravy from Colorado Color Company, which is a vac stacked tube. As you can see, there's a bunch of colored rods stacked inside a pair of clear tubes. And now we're gonna prep up the backing color. This is actually a piece of amber purple over galaxy. This is a wonder tube from Northstar Glass. I'm going to pick a hole on the end open and do a little lip wrap of galaxy on there. I like to put a little lip wrap to make a border around the pattern in the front. I actually, shooting that intro, put a big slice into my finger. I was trying to clean some fingerprints off of that vac stack tubing and totally shredded my finger. I don't know if anybody noticed the cut on the tip of my finger in the video in the beginning. I was frustrated. It took me a while to get that shot while I was bleeding. So here we're puffing out a round bottom into the tube. I give that some even heat, like really make sure that it kind of has a chance to cook back into the tubing. You take it out of the flame and let that settle a little bit. It helps the inside and outside come to a more even temperature, and you get a more even bubble on the end. Once I've got it fairly even, I'll start to thin the end just a little bit. I heat right at the tip of the bubble. We're going to start doing that here. I'll puff it out and thin it a little bit and use a rod to pick it away. I actually have noticed that this tube, the galaxy on the inside being a black, is a little stiff compared to the amber purple, which is a lot thinner. And I find picking a hole, it either picks open immediately or takes forever. And I finally actually decide to blow this one out. You can see it kind of thinning here a little bit, but it just wasn't opening while I was picking, so I went a different route. So here we go to puff it out, and you'll see it blow out in the flame. And then I clean a little bit off just where there's always a little tail that kind of collects on one side of the hole when you blow a hole out like that. Now I took my pointed reamer to start opening that hole up a little bit. And then once it's big enough for my larger reamer, I grab that one. Just like even rotation, making sure everything's hot. You're trying to keep that hole right in the center. You don't want to push it to one side or the other. It really affects how things condense when you add the bubble that the pattern, the wigwag is. So there I got a little chunk of galaxy that I stretched out to a stringer. It's actually the end of the stringer is looking a little chunky. It's not how I pull my stringers. That's just the rod that I pulled the stringer on. Then we carefully wrap that, trying to get a real even chunk of galaxy as a lip wrap there. I'll press it on the marver to kind of flatten out any little bumps. And then we heat it up and get it all flowing together, and then open it with the reamer again. So we want that hole nice and even so that we can add the wigwag to it once we pull the wigwag off the tube. And that's looking about right, so we're going to head to the kiln here. Just getting one more little open on the reamer. We got all these rods sticking out of the kiln door. We got the Wavy Gravy sitting there right next to this. It's already been stretched down a little bit, so I'm gonna actually stretch the end a little bit more, but that's not the stock size of the tube. So here we're handling up to the tip, and this pattern I've got like more of a spiral at the center rather than continuing with the switchback pattern the whole way down. So I think the first thing I'm going to do here is handle up to that tip and give it a good twist. And then kind of start to stretch about half that down. I'm puffing into it just to kind of expand and even out the walls a little, trying to avoid any uneven shoulders in the glass where glass collects around where you've been heating. So there we've got the second stage of my torch going. We're gonna, like I said, heat up about half of that and stretch it just a little bit more. It's not gonna get stretched much, but as you can see, it's kind of thinning a little bit there and getting a touch longer. So like, we're gonna start doing the wigwag now. We've got the smaller flame that we'll start with after we've stretched out this last bit, and we heat bands into the tube and then turn it back and forth. This wigwag technique, I was actually trying to figure out where it came from, and in Torch Talk I knew that I had seen some conversations about it in the past, and I think it was Jason Lee who was saying that this type of reversal probably was mostly started in like Germany with montage pieces in the 1930s, I believe. And there was a series of people who were taught from kind of like a lineage of German lamp workers. And then the North American pipe makers kind of expanded on the types of patterns that were made with this type of technique. So you're going to see I'm going to heat narrow little bands, and then I just twist, pause, and I'm really trying to line up some of the lines to get all the crest of each turn and switch back to be very close to the same spot. And I find often with this type of wigwag, doing the reversals, you don't need to twist much. I find actually sometimes if you over twist, it really kind of muddies the pattern. There's definitely ways to make it look really good with a nice jagged twist and turn, but sometimes with these smaller pendants, less is often more. And in a couple of my last uploads, I've actually sped things up, and today I figured this was about a half an hour, similar kind of time to some of my other uploads, and I thought I could keep it at regular speed so you can see exactly how long each of these steps takes. The timing of glass is very important. It's always a balance of getting the right amount of heat into the glass to do the move that you want to do next. And everything's a rhythm when you're trying to repeat something in an even way. You really want each band to be heated for a similar amount of time and then twisted in the same amount and then back and forth. As you can see, there's that switch back. Now I'm going to start to heat that whole thing up and condense it. And this can be a little bit difficult sometimes. If you're not used to it, you can twist up your pattern. You're really trying to, or I'm really trying here to keep everything straight and not over twist in one direction so that it moves those radiating twists and turns into more of a spiral pattern. I really want to keep those twists and turns in more of a straight line. Here we can see it's really flopping around. My handles are getting loose, and I'm pushing together ever so slightly. See how there's quite a bit of bending going on, but I kept everything really straight still. And as long as you wait until things even out in temperature, you can really puff out an even bubble. And there I'm pretty happy with how that went, and I'm going to start heating right at the end of the pattern and thinning the glass to cut that away from the rest of the tube and the flame. So there's that puff, starting to thin that edge. Got 2 angles on that. It's nice to have a second set of hands to do some filming in the shop with me. You can see that puffed out really nicely, and I'm gonna stretch it a little more and then blow out a little hole so I can rip that apart without sealing that bubble shut. That's another thinning puff. This really just like blows out a membrane so it's easier to cut right where I want. And here I'll blow that hole out just so that I don't seal anything up as I rip that away in the flame. And that opens up a little bit odd, and I'll take a rod and start to pick away some of that excess glass. This just helps clean up the edge of the pattern, because that's the part that's going to attach to the lip wrap I did on the first tube that we were working on. So now I've picked up my octagonal reamer again. I'm going to use that to open up that hole. That's going to force any extra glass that I need to pick away outwards so I can see exactly where it is and pull it away until I have a nice even ring there. Making sure that's nice and even really has a lot to do with when the pattern condenses into the other tube we prepped up. It's going to make it so that the radiating lines that switch back all the way around the pattern condense evenly. If you have a heavy piece of glass on the inside of that pattern, it's either going to distort the pattern or push out that portion of the lip wrap that we prepped on the end of that other tube, and then you end up with a bit more of an oval or a wiggly line instead of the nice ring that I'm looking for. So yeah, we just continue to pick away glass until we're left with a pretty even hole. There is a little bit of wiggle room for kind of condensing uneven glass here, and I'm kind of doing that right now. I'm just pressing the lines inwards and pushing it together so I have a bit more of a thick chunk of glass to place against that other hole that we opened on the other tube. There you can see that twist and all the switchbacks. Now we're going to go to the kiln and pick up that other tube. So I hold them against each other just to kind of size up the 2 holes, make sure they're even. I'll often just hold both in my one hand and open up one of them if I need to, but they were nice and even, so I just go straight to trying to stick them together. And I want that galaxy lip wrap that I made to be just slightly larger than where the end of all those rods come out of the end of that wigwag, because I'd like that galaxy lip wrap to be a border, and if you open up that hole too far, the ends of the rods stick out on the face of the pattern and it looks a little funny. So now, heating that connection point, I'm going to try not to twist, turn, or stretch this. I really want to condense it and puff it out. So we successively do a few heats right on that line, kind of switching back and forth between heating the tube we're condensing the pattern into and the edge of that wigwag pattern. You can see it start to expand a little bit here. And I'm really trying not to twist, because the more twisting you do at this point, just like messing up the wigwag pattern, when you're condensing that, I don't want to twist the lip wrap. You can really take a nice crisp lip wrap and make it wavy by doing twisting at this point. So we got a nice bunch of heat in there, good pause, even rotation, and then puff, puff, puff. So you can see that expands nicely there. And that's expanded enough now that I'm not worried about the pattern flopping around if I remove a handle. So we're going to go to flame cutting that handle away, which will let me start to use gravity to condense that pattern into the tube. Up until this point, we're really using our hands to push it together, and it's nice to be able to get back to the heat and gravity and even rotation being the only thing to worry about. But yeah, you don't want to do that too early. Sometimes it can really make the pendant or the pattern flop around and condense unevenly. But to make sure that it does condense the way I want, I'm going to start to heat a larger area. I'm going to heat up the bigger tube that we're condensing the wigwag into a little bit more now, and use that to expand the edge of the wigwag pattern so that it can condense into a little bit more of a disc. And then you start to see the pattern that we've twisted up. Here we go, another puff. You'll see the shoulder kind of expand. That's exactly what we're looking for. This type of pattern, there's actually a lot of variation you can do with it. A few weeks back, or actually almost 2 months now, I did my first upload and I made a tube with electrum and clear. So half the tube was electrum and half the tube was clear, and I did my switchbacks into that. And then when I condensed the bubble, I popped the hole on the side instead of ripping it straight off the tube. This gives you a chance to actually put the wigwag on its side. You kind of switch 90-degree axis, and then instead of having all those radiating lines going from the center outwards, you have this waving jigsaw kind of pattern going around a clear window, which is a really cool effect. There's so many different ways people do this, from stop and starts to bow ties. I don't have any examples of those to share with you at the moment, but the variety of patterns you can get from wigwagging and kind of treating the bubble a little bit differently or changing axis is really huge. There's so many awesome ways to go about this type of work. So there I was using my paddle to kind of press the face of the pendant inwards and kind of flatten it a little bit more, just kind of mitigating any expanding I was doing as I was trying to puff out the edge of the pendant. Now we're heating it nicely. This is getting to a point where we're gonna kind of press it on the graphite plate. So I use gravity, or not gravity, but I'm using a little bit of pressure just to puff against the table, which helps me expand the edge where I'm gonna pop the couple holes for the necklace to pass through. I really want to expand that a little bit so that I can kind of make that colored edge a nice big border. The amber purple over galaxy has a really nice effect, and I want to be able to see that around the Wavy Gravy wigwag. Yeah, just taking some time, getting this heated up. Very careful to expand and heat evenly. It's kind of dark tubing. You can't see through any of this stuff. So if you expand things too much, you can end up with thin spots that you don't realize. It's definitely a little bit of an adjustment working on the tubing that isn't see-through. It's really makes it easy to even the walls out when you can see through to the interior. But over time, getting used to having an even heat base and even rotation and pausing at the right times before you puff, you can really make an even wall without having to see inside. So here we're heating that edge a little bit more. I'm just trying to condense it a little bit. It does thin out sometimes, like I mentioned. See, I've got that pendant kind of facing upwards using the what I would call an elbow down kind of orientation, where you have the pendant facing upwards, just trying to collect that glass. You can really affect how things condense by the angle of your arm and how you hold things. Sometimes letting things droop and extend and elongate is what you need, and other times you're trying to collect things up so you point your handle upwards. And once I've got this condensed to the point I want, I think we're getting there right now. Another little press on that marver. And then I'm gonna actually handle up to the face of the pendant. There you can see that pattern. I was really happy with how that twisted up. Looked really great. Now I'm just cleaning up the end of a rod so I can handle up to the center of the face of that pendant and stretch the tubing in the back. It's a little bit too large at the moment, and if I pop the holes to pass the necklace through now, I'll end up distorting the holes a lot more than if I kind of set this up beforehand. So we're going to heat that section right there where I'm starting to put a bit of heat into that spot behind the pendant, and I'm going to stretch to a point where I can kind of have the almost finished form of the front half of the pendant done, and then I'll pop those holes. So here we see I'm just taking some time to get that heat in there, and then I start to stretch it a little bit. Yeah, just kind of setting things up so I don't have to do as much work after. And so that my work doesn't get distorted by what I need to do later. I've managed to really pull the holes into the backside of the pendant a few times and distort things in the past. So this is an important step. As you can see, that kind of hourglass shape forming. This is what I'm looking for. That allows me to heat a little bit more of a thin section so the flame cut after I've made those holes goes smoothly and quickly, and I have a little less glass to condense and potentially pick away. See, I'm very careful to do nice cold seals. The way that handle cracked off is exactly what we want. It didn't leave any excess glass. Sometimes if you overheat things when you do a cold seal, you can really end up with a jagged piece of glass, and I don't want to be having to pick anything away from the face of the pendant. There's potential for ruining the termination that I've already made. So here we go, just kind of setting up, gonna condense a little bit more and just kind of press with the paddle just to flatten the pendant a touch more. That'll make sure that the pendant isn't too big of a bubble when we finally condense the backside and flatten it out. There you can see that nice pattern. Still glowing. Those cadmium colors really get dark when you heat them up. So here I am heating up the first hole. I'm going to puff a little blister out, and I'll do this in a couple steps. So I heat that little blister out and then quickly heat it again to kind of puff a really thin membrane that I can pick away easily. So there I'm lining up the pattern. I puffed out one of those holes, and then I'll pick where I want to put the next one very carefully so that I can orient the pattern in a specific way. And then I'm really kind of counting when I do this. I go in for probably about 5 or 6 seconds, just like that, and then puff. Not really trying to keep that timing even and directing the flame in a very specific spot to puff out these holes in the same orientation on that shoulder. If one's too far forward or too far to the back, it can really make it difficult to make those holes kind of expand nicely. Once again, just doing a few heats, I go back in on that thin membrane that I've already puffed out and puff again a few times just to set it up so that I'm ready to open a very even hole. And I'm judging those two blisters against each other the whole time, really trying to make sure that they're forming at the same place and the same rate. So we're getting close here. I'm gonna pick up a rod shortly, and I'll start to pull a bit of a point on each of those. There it is. I'm just going to pull that out, pick a little glass away, and then I try to do the same thing here, and unfortunately a little bit of the scrap glass just stuck to the piece. So I quickly pick up my tweezers and I go in on that with those instead of the rod, just to make sure I don't condense any of that scrap glass back into the pendant. I really want to be careful to remove everything. I don't want any boiled glass around the hole. It's one of the most frustrating things is when I have a little bit of boiled glass on the edge of that hole, and when you have the finished piece out of the kiln, you find this little rough spot, and I always try to go back in and fix that up, and the best time is the first time. There's definitely ways to handle up to these again later and fix things up, but I'd prefer not to. It's definitely way easier when you have things on a solid handle like this is right now. And right now I just keep picking that little membrane away, trying to open it up. I do think I end up puffing this hole out as well. And there we go, kind of continuing to just... This can be a very slow process sometimes, depending on how the glass is acting. Like I said before, this amber purple over Galaxy, I think amber purple is a very viscous molten glass, whereas Galaxy is a little bit stiffer, and it just doesn't quite behave the way I expect to sometimes. The more I work with it, the more I get used to it, though. Now I've got my little pointed reamer. I'm going to open that hole up a little bit. Just kind of running around the outside just to push the edge open. And then I'll pick up my larger reamer and use that to make sure it's a nice ring. See there, that color's had a chance to cool off a little bit, and you're seeing that rainbow come out. Still a little hot, so it's not the natural colors, but it's definitely starting to look the way it does once it's a finished product. There we go, just doing the exact same thing on that other hole. Like I said, there's the larger reamer. Kind of twisting that and turning it, just making sure I get a nice even ring. I use the pointed reamer to get it about to the size I want, but the larger reamer makes it easier to give you a nice circular ring. There we having a peek at the pattern. Now we're ready to handle up to the face of that pendant and peel it away from that other tube. I was really happy with how this one turned out. It was nice to kind of do the Wigwag tutorial again and not miss any parts of this process. I was pretty frustrated when I ran into some full hard drive issues and my camera stopped filming on the last one, but I was at a done is better than perfect kind of step in my workflow, so I just wanted to get a YouTube video uploaded right away, and I'm glad I did. It's nice to make some mistakes early and figure out a bunch of things that you can fix. And this YouTube video definitely has been a lot more smooth than my first one. It's nice to have a second camera in the shop. I've actually since gotten a nicer camera as well, so the footage is actually higher quality. My voiceover on the early video was pretty rough. I've figured out my microphone and figured out how to talk into it a little bit better now too, so really just trying to up my quality on this process. Here I handle up to the face of that pendant, and I actually really put it off center, so this is a chance where you can either redo your handle or kind of bend your handle. And because I don't want to handle up to the face of that pendant too many times, I decided to heat about an inch or so out, and I'm going to kind of make sure that handle is center, even though it's not holding the perfect center of the pendant. So you can see that little little wobble in the end of the handle there, but the handle itself is quite straight, so I'll be able to condense the back side of the pendant nicely. And there I am flame cutting that tubing away from the back of the pendant. And this happens fairly quickly because we stretched the pendant down a little bit earlier. And then I'm going to find a spot to put that down. I like to show both angles on this. It's nice to have the two cameras, so why not share the couple different angles? See some of those important steps twice instead of just once. And as you can see, that nice patterns there. It's a lot of fun seeing it glow from the back side here when you have the back side of the pendant heated up. Glassblowing is such a treat to watch. I really like watching all the glass glowing when it's in the midst of being made, almost as much as I enjoy seeing all the finished colors when I'm done things. But yeah, we're just setting that heat into the backside, really trying not to heat the holes up too much. I think the backside of the openings will condense into the back of the pendant a little bit, but like I said before, we're stretching early on just to try and avoid that. See, I wipe the little graphite plate a little bit with my hand there, just trying to make sure there's nothing to get stuck on the back of the pendant as I flatten it out a little. And now the amber purple collects some oxides on the surface, so I've got a fairly oxygenated flame, and I'm just going to slowly rotate in the flame, trying to clean up some of those oxides so that you can see through to the galaxy. You can see that sparkle in the back of the pendant there. That's where the amber purple has been heated to the point of cleaning those oxides off of the surface of the glass. And I just want to make sure that the edges of the pendant have a little bit of that showing through too. I do like the way the creamy colors of the oxides that do reduce on the surface look, but I don't want them everywhere. So like I said, like these striking colors like amber purple, turn up that oxygen and you can really pick where you clear up the glass a little bit. Just like having a little moment to inspect where it's, or how that color's looking. And I think I'm happy with it, so I give it a chance to cool off a little. I'm going to warm up my tweezers there, and I'm going to crack that handle off. Now I'm going to polish that up. Just make sure that little mark from the punty is gone. So, like I said, this is my second Wigwag tutorial. I'm going to link to the other one in the description so you can see kind of what I did on the other piece. But this is another way to go about doing a Wigwag. Definitely a much better documentation of the process. You can see a lot of the angles and a lot of the steps I missed on the first one when my hard drive filled up. But now I'm just going to wait a minute so we can see how that looks. I think I still saw a little bit of the punty mark, so I'm going back to polishing it away a little bit. And there we go. I think that's about done. Oh, maybe not. Sometimes that termination does take a little bit of time to polish out. There we are, showing the pattern to the camera. I've put a few of these up on my Etsy shop and they seem to sell out real quick, so I thought it'd be a fun piece to share with everybody. I'll be doing some more tutorials in the next few weeks. Gonna try and keep this going, hopefully at a weekly upload. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think. Let me know any pieces you'd like to see made in the future. Have a good one, guys.